Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the 2023 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. My name is Brigid Martin, author of the new middle grade series, Totally Psychic, and I'm so excited to be with you all here today to talk with some incredible authors about their books. As a reminder, please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box, and don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. And if you are a school, classroom, librarian, or educator joining us, our school visit fund is back. You can enter to win a free virtual visit from a Latinx author or illustrator for your classroom or library. You can find the link to the entry form in the chat. We have a great lineup for you here today of authors who all showcase how their characters overcome challenges and stigmas by finding their voice. I'm going to give a brief introduction for each of our panelists here before we kick things off with the questions. First up, we have with us Tamika Burgess, author of Sincerely, Sicily. Tamika is a storyteller with over a decade of novel and personal essay writing experience. Born to parents who migrated from Panama, Tamika has always taken a particular interest in writing themes that explore her Black Latina identity. Her middle grade novel, Sincerely, Sicily, features 11-year-old Sicily who learns to use her voice and take pride in her Black Panamanian heritage, while confronting prejudice both in the classroom and at home. We also have with us Keka Novales. Keka is originally from Guatemala and now calls Texas her home. She lives with her husband, their 3 children, and 3 dogs. Keka has an amazing book series called Hola, Lola. And today she's going to talk with us a little bit about Lola's First Day of the Dead. In this illustrated chapter book, Lola's family is invited to a Day of the Dead party. But when Lola discovers that a Guatemalan dish called fiambre is on the menu, she panics. Can Lola find the courage to share in the celebration and try something new? And finally, we have Jasminne Mendez, a best-selling Dominican-American poet, translator, playwright, and award-winning author of several books for children and adults here with us. Her most recent publication, Aniana Del Mar Jumps In, is a novel in verse about a young girl diagnosed with juvenile idiopathic arthritis, received starred reviews from Kirkus Reviews, Publishers Weekly, School Library Journal, and others. So like I said, this is a great group of folks we have here, an incredible list of panelists, and now let's dive into some questions. So I'll start off with you, Tamika.
Okay.
All right. So as we know, starting a new school and making new friends can be super tough. So how does Sicily overcome her anxieties of starting someplace new while still maintaining her old friendships?
Well, at first she doesn't know that there's anything to overcome because she has spent all summer thinking she's going to the same school with all her friends from elementary school. So in the story, it's maybe a week or two before school starts that she learns the new school down the street has opened. And not only does she have to go, none of her friends are going, and she has to wear a uniform. So, I mean, just that alone is like kind of like a smack in the face for her. um, but as she goes through the story, she through an old friend, she realizes I can make new friends and it's okay. And in doing so, I don't have to push the old ones out. Like I can have my friend group can basically expand. So over time, she figures out that she can have both.
I think that's such a great message to be sending about how you could still have that old friendship
Mm-hmm.
and still make new friends, which is really great. And as she does that, she really finds her voice. And with that in mind, I have my question for Jasminne here. So your main character, Aniana, she needs to find her voice and advocate for herself as well throughout your novel. So in what ways do you have her character do that? Like how does she find her voice and advocate for herself along the way?
Yeah, so throughout her journey, so she's a swimmer and she loves to swim, and she has different factors that prevent her from going back to the water from swimming. One of them being her juvenile idiopathic arthritis diagnosis, but the other one really being her mom's trauma around the water. Her mom has a past trauma related to a drowning in her family, and so she's really hesitant to let Aniana get into the water and to swim, and especially after she's diagnosed with this chronic autoimmune disease. And so Aniana, throughout the story, learns that keeping things inside is really not beneficial, right, for her health, for her stress levels, and just for what she wants as she gets older. And it's really sort of a coming of age story in the sense that she really is learning how to speak up for herself. And so she, comes to a point where she says, "This is my body," and everyone thinks they know what's best for it. The doctors, the physical therapist, my parents, but I'm the one living in my body, and I know what I want, and I know what might work, right? At least I want to try. I want to also be a part of the conversation of what happens to my body. And so she finally is able to speak up after sort of many trials and tribulations, right? And many confrontations and difficult conversations. But she learns that staying silent about what she wants and not advocating for herself is harming her. And so she finds a way to finally speak up and tell her parents, "Look, this is what I want. So can we, work together to try to figure out how to make it happen so that you feel safe and comfortable and I feel good in my body, and we're all kind of on the same page about it." But it does take her a while to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really shows like how she comes such a long way to overcome those obstacles and her fears and anxieties and as well as her mother's fears and anxieties.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I see really tied in with all three of your books in particular. So I'm going to have my next question now is for Keka, because Lola, her fears are a little different. And one of them I know is related to her costumes and food, trying new things. So why does Lola find it so important to become one with her fears?
So at first, this book is about Lola and the Day of the Dead. So it ties along with Halloween. Halloween is October 31st and Day of the Dead is November 1st. So Lola is trying to find a costume, and her mom thinks, oh, maybe a princess or something like she has always done before. But Lola this year, she wants to be a spider because she thinks it's very important to conquer her fears. And the only way to actually conquer your fears is to face them and to try to understand them. So usually you fear what you don't understand. So that's why she wants to be a spider for Halloween and just have her mind try to think like a spider.
It's cute.
Yeah, I thought that was really sweet. And I loved how that theme also kind of tied into not just the costuming, but the trying new things with food, being afraid and overcoming it and becoming one with your fears, like you said.
Yeah, because she's extremely picky, and fiambre is a dish that originated at the graveyard. So it's a mixture of vegetables. It has cold cuts. It has boiled eggs, cheese. So it's a mixture of everything, and she is terrified of trying new things and mixing things. She cannot even eat peanut butter and jelly. So imagine having to try fiambre is a nightmare for her. So she has to overcome that fear because it's an important holiday for her mom, and it's also part of who she is.
Yes, and spoiler, I think she might overcome her fears in the end. But so as we know, the writing process can be so long, and there's a lot of time sitting with the original draft of the manuscript, the idea, going back and forth with editors. So is there, this is a question for all of you, and I'll call on each of you so we know what order to go in. But what was one scene in particular in your books that you spent the most time either writing or revising? And I'll start with Tamika.
I don't think I had a particular scene, but overall, what I spent a lot of time was just getting Sicily's feelings, I guess, showing them instead of telling them. That way that the reader can, of course, read it, but really empathize with what Sicily was going through and feeling at different stages with all the stuff that she goes through in the story. So I remember doing specific read-throughs just focusing on emotion. Because I was really, like I said, it was really important for me to have the readers be able to connect with her and really, even if they personally haven't gone through what Sicily was going through, but to really feel for her and understand what she was feeling. So, yeah.
Okay, and next we'll have Keka go.
For me, it's kind of the same. I didn't spend a lot of time in that particular chapter, but it was all about show and don't tell. Because sometimes you have the story in your mind and you know what you're trying to say, but you have to actually make sure that you're showing, not telling.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. And especially for yours, because you have the illustrated aspect in your chapter book too. So you can actually have the ability to show both in the words and in the pictures.
Exactly.
And I guess, maybe this wasn't the best question to ask, but okay. So Jasmine, do you have any scene that?
Yeah. Well, it's a novel in verse, so it was a little hard to pick scenes, but I will say that probably the thing that I spent the most time on working through, both on my own and then with like the book designers, was the concrete shape poems in the book. So I have a number of concrete shape poems that were the joy and also the bane of my existence, because I thought they were so clever and they were so fun. But then sort of thinking about, right, like the words and how to shape them on the page, and if I have enough words to make the size of like the turtle or the heart or the circle that I want. And so revising those poems and those shape poems, not just for formatting on the page, but for content as well, and making sure that I had the shape poems that I wanted, was probably what I spent the most time on with this book, aside from, just kind of individual poems in general, and thinking about language and being very precise and concise with language, as one needs to be with poetry, and sort of leaning away from my tendency to get more prose-ish and more narrative, and trying to pull back and remember, like, it's a novel in verse, and where is the poetry? Like, always reminding myself, where is the poetry in this piece? And could this piece stand alone, or is it a part of a larger, you need everything else around it? And like, how can I make it more distinctive as a poem in its own right? So that was, for me, probably what I spent the most time on.
Yeah, and visually, I have to say, just like how you laid out the text in the poems, like that, it was just stunning, both in the words and how it flowed. And I really enjoyed how it was really tied in with like the water aspect and like the water narrative, how the shape of those words really flowed. So that was really lovely. Okay, so I will stay with you, Jasmine, here for the next question. So as we know, as you mentioned, the main character, Aniana, she has chronic pain. So in what ways does she find healing through her swimming, both physically and spiritually?
Yeah. So at first, she's not aware. It takes the physical therapist to kind of inform her, and her doctors to let her know, like, hey, actually, swimming and being in the water could actually be beneficial for you and be helpful. And so she, despite, she actually doesn't really get into the water right away when she wants to, in order to find that healing. But her doctors do let her know that there's less resistance and less pressure on her joints, in water activities and in swimming, and things like that. And so she is trying to convince her mom and her parents to let her go back in the water, but they don't feel like she's strong enough. But she has moments where she is near the water, and for her, that closeness and that connection to the water is emotionally like stabilizing and grounding, and healing for her. And she has these conversations with her father, talking about, if mommy's God is in heaven or is one kind of way and your God is everywhere, then I believe that, my God lives in the ocean. And she sort of sees this spiritual connection to the water. And she's always loved being in the water. And that just comes kind of from my own experience and background of feeling that closeness. My parents are from the Dominican Republic, and so I'm just a daughter of islanders, right? And that kind of a thing. And so Ani sees it that same way, that she believes that if she can get in the water, it will help her, emotionally and physically, and knowing, especially too, that stress is tied into whether she flares or has a severe bout of chronic pain. And for her, not being in the water is stressful. So being in the water, she assumes, will alleviate some of that, distress, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, and she really has such a good group of friends too that kind of identify that something seemed a little wrong with her knee, and that she just thought everything was okay and didn't want to believe it. So it's always good to have people in your life to kind of look out for you. So I'm gonna go on to my next question for Tamika. So we know that Sicily, she's starting her new school. She's a little anxious about it. She feels pretty happy once she sees that she has a friend there, and and she's able to give her presentation in class about her background. But how does she handle things once her identity starts coming into question? Because we know kids can sometimes ask things that might not be like the most inclusive or caring. So do you hope also that readers who identify with Sicily feel empowered to love all parts of themselves that make them unique?
Yeah, so like you were saying, she does have to do a class presentation. Basically, all the students are sharing about their cultural background. So she goes into it very confident, excited. I know everything about Panama. I'm ready to share. And then when it comes to the audience questions, the classmates are, how are you Black, but your family's from Panama? So in that moment, Cicely's never had to deal with that. Both sides of her family are Black Panamanians, and that's what she's known. And, no one's ever questioned her. So she freezes. She doesn't know, what do I say? How do I explain this? I just know who I am, what I've always been, the people around me. So it's not till the end of the book, when she kind of goes through her self-discovery journey, that she's able to understand for herself. And in terms of readers taking away anything from that, I just hope that they would learn to appreciate who they are, as Sicily does. Like, going through and understanding for herself brought about a new sense of confirmation and not confirmation, confidence, and kind of like, I wouldn't say a cockiness, but like, she's with her shoulders back now. She feels good about learning about this aspect of who she is. Going deeper, I would say. So I would hope that readers would take from that, like, learn to appreciate who you are and where you come from. And then just being appreciated and being appreciative and empowered by what they read, and see how Sicily handles it in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was such a beautiful messaging that you had woven throughout. And it's not only that she had to deal with that struggle in school of having to, share her experience and love herself for who she is, but she also has that at home with her grandmother, who doesn't, who makes a lot of comments about her hair. So she's dealing with it both in school and at home, and that could be really tough sometimes. So
yeah. So she's getting it on two fronts there, right? Her grandmother is like, oh, it's time, no more braids. It's time to straighten your hair. You're in 6th grade. You're getting older. And her grandmother was always that, like her rock. When her parents wouldn't let her get away with stuff, her grandma's the one who came around and smoothed it out for her. So there's another shocking point for Sicily. It's like, wow, this woman that's always been this is now this. And how do I deal with that change? So there's kind of like, it's kind of like a twofold situation that Sicily experiences.
Mm-hmm. And we love our grandmas, but sometimes they can be a little opinionated, but they push us sometimes.
Yes.
It's okay. But, and similar, well, in a different way, I guess, for Keka, we have Lola's character who interacts with her abuelita, even though she doesn't live with them. And she kind of pushes her a little bit with food, and her not wanting to try new things. So how does Lola find ways to interact with her abuelita, even though she lives in Guatemala?
Yeah, whenever she has a problem, she usually the first person that she wants to call is abuelita. So she's always talking to abuelita, and even when things are difficult, sometimes she goes to her mom, but her guiding voice is her abuelita. Abuelita
Mm-hmm.
gives her advice all the time. She tries to encourage her and makes her take her own decisions, but usually tries to give her like a life lesson on the way and try to integrate her heritage in the lessons that she gives. So with trying a new food, she with fiambre, Lola is really scared to try it, but she tells her like, you can or cannot try it, but if you don't try it, you're going to offend the person that invited you to the party, and you don't want to try it because you don't know all the work that goes behind it. So she offers to give her a lesson on how to prepare the fiambre. And Lola learns that it's not only about the food, but also about the stories. And when you're preparing the food, how you talk about, like, oh, your great grandfather like this, or your great grandmother like that. So in a way, it's prepared for the Day of the Dead, but you're also honoring the dead while cooking. And something special about this dish is that it's all red. Basically, it has a reddish tone because the vegetables are boiled in beet juice. So Abuelita asks her, why do you think beets are important? Why do you think it's part of the dish? And then Lola thinks about it, and she thinks it's a root. So it's about our roots and how everything ties together.
Yes, and speaking of things tying together, I really felt with all three of these novels, like a strong sense of self in all of them, and the writing felt so authentic. So I'm so curious, how much of these stories were inspired by your personal experience? And we could start with Jasminne for this one.
Yeah. So in some ways, yes. And there's an author's note in the book that talks a little bit about it. It wasn't my own experience in middle school per se. I had a much different experience in Aniana in middle school, or at that age level, 12, 13. But I did definitely have my tensions with my own mother. So that is constantly writing about mothers and daughters, whether I want to or not. It's sort of a theme and a topic that I keep coming back to in most of my work. But I, like Aniana, was diagnosed with a chronic illness. I was diagnosed much later in life than Aniana was, or is in the book. I was 22 when I was diagnosed, and my chronic illness is not the same as Aniana's. I don't have JIA, but they're in the same similar family of illnesses, of autoimmune diseases. So I have lupus and scleroderma, which attack my joints, my muscles, my bones, my internal organs, heart, lungs, and kidneys. And so I've been on quite a journey over the last 10 years. And I started thinking about and kind of exploring, like, what does it mean to have a chronic illness as a young person? And I didn't see or read or find many books like that. There are more books being written about young children and adolescents with disabilities, as well as chronic illness, or dealing with having to navigate a parent with a disability or a chronic illness, but none that I had seen that specifically targeted autoimmune diseases, chronic illnesses that won't go away, that you can treat them and you can manage them, but they will be with you for life. And, you know, something outside of a cancer diagnosis, right? And so I wanted to explore that topic through the lens of a middle grade child, and see what that meant, you know, for this character and for this character's life. But I wanted Aniana to have more courage and more strength than perhaps I did, or that took me a long time to find. Even as an adult, when I was diagnosed, it took me a very long time to advocate for myself, in doctors' offices, and even towards my parents, who were still treating me like a child at 22 years old. And I was like, I am an adult, and I know that they did it out of love. And so I wanted to show that when a young person is diagnosed with a chronic illness, it's not just them that's affected, everyone around them is also affected, and they have to grieve the person who you once were, as much as you have to grieve who you once were, and learn to accept who you are and who you are becoming. And so I really wanted that message to come across for young people, that it's okay if you're not the same version of yourself that you were pre-diagnosis. Like, that's to be expected. So now how are you going to move forward, right? How are you going to move through, and how are you hopefully going to allow the people in your life to love you and bring them with you on this journey, in a positive, non-ableist way.
Yeah, and I think that really is reflective in the text, how she does find her strength in that acceptance. So Tamika, you could go next for if this was based on your personal experience.
So yeah, the bulk of it, well, the main purpose of the story, Sicily being questioned about her Black Panamanian culture, that is directly what I experienced. She went through it in middle school, whereas I didn't get it till college. I grew up in the same area from like third all the way through high school. So I think people just Panamanian, and just kind of accepted it. And it wasn't until college where people like, wait a minute, how is that possible? And their minds were blown. And, you know, and sometimes we're like, oh, you're lying. That's not true. That's not possible. So those experiences are what stuck with me. And I guess you would say planted the seed for the story, because I always knew like somehow I want to write about this, for people to get a clear understanding about race and culture. So that aspect, and then I think, yeah, specifically being questioned about the race and culture. A lot of people who have read the book ask me if my abuela was like that with me about my hair. So I'm like, no, she wasn't like that. Like, people always try to pinpoint, like, who's this in your family? Who's that? I'm like, no, it's, you know, bits and pieces of people that I pulled. But that the main focus of the book, the race and the culture, that's directly from things that I've experienced and people questioning me about it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely unavoidable to share bits of yourself in whatever you write. But that is such a common theme with family members and friends, just trying to like pick through to see, like, is this me?
Yeah.
Like, do you really feel this way about me? It's like,
exactly.
No, it's not you. And Keka, do you find that Lola is inspired by any parts of your life and experience?
Well, actually, I was a picky eater, but not to the extreme of my daughter. So one of my daughters, she's super picky. So I struggle with it, and I have met many friends and family members that struggle with kids that are picky eaters. So I thought this would be a good tool for other kids and parents to utilize, just to introduce new foods and to talk about how sometimes things seem scary, but once you understand what it is, it's okay to try it or not try it, but at least give it a chance. And food and culture it ties together. And the mom is homesick about this tradition. So I'm first generation, so I still miss a lot of things that happen in Guatemala, and my kids are not experiencing them. So in a way, I wanted to do my books to capture those things that they are missing, but they will be forever in a book. And for other families that were on the same boat, that we're missing that part of our culture, but for the new generation, it's just, Lola describes the fiambre as the dish of or horrors, because it's just terrible for her, but for the mom is something really special. So it's important to have that connection and to see both sides, like understand why Lola fears it, because it's a new thing, it's at a new place, but at the same time Lola gets to understand her mom and sees other people that have the same struggle, that they are missing what they left behind.
And like you mentioned, we know that food and traditions are really such an important way to embrace our culture. So in what ways do you find that Lola connects with her Guatemalan roots beyond the food?
She loves to learn about all the Mayan culture. She wants to be an archaeologist when she grows up. So she enjoys reading about and learning about all the Mayan traditions and stories that usually Abuelita tells her. And little things like having the stories of when they are making the fiambre, like the mom tells her, oh, you have your great grandmother's nose, and little things throughout the days that build up to who she is and where she comes from.
And I think that's such a great, message that you're getting across there. On a completely different question topic I have here for you, Jasmine. There's no segue that I have for this next one, but so you, by leaning as your main character is dealing with a lot of change, how do you find that by leaning into topics such as past trauma, grief, and chronic pain, were there any scenes in particular that you found challenging to write?
That's a good question. I think it's so interesting to answer this question, because I've written memoir and poetry about my own experience with chronic illness. So in a way, I feel like a lot of the difficult things that I address in this book, I've sort of just repackaged them. I've sort of repurposed them. I've sort of rehashed them just in a different way, and in a fictional character, with fictional family and fictional relationships. And so I think that for me, it wasn't as difficult as maybe I expected, or people expected. It all just came at once. I wrote, this is my 2020 pandemic book, baby. And so I was like in the house, and words were just happening. I got this idea and they just started flowing. And I think that there were some scenes that were maybe more difficult to shape and to ensure that I was kind of, honoring the sensitivity, right, of the issue right at hand, the trauma that was being discussed or handled. I think the scene where the mom tells a story of why she has, what the trauma was, who it was that drowned in her family, and why it's impactful for her. Why this sort of relationship, the grief sticks with her, right? That one was interesting. Took me a couple tries to get into. And then I think the most climactic moment, the scene where Ani is about to get into the water against her mom's wishes, and mommy comes and, and stops her quite violently. And so, I think that rendering any of that on the page, you just have to be careful, right? You don't want to trigger your reader. You want to do it in a way that's sensitive to the experience, right? To that moment, and also find a way to repair. I think I struggled more with, like, how do I instill joy into this narrative filled with trauma and sadness? Like, where are the moments of joy? That's actually what I struggled with more than the difficult moments, quite frankly. I took several developmental revisions to be like, okay, we know mommy is kind of the antagonist, but mommy is also a mother. So let's give her like let's make her a whole person, right? What are moments of joy between Aniana and mommy? What are moments of levity in the family, right? What are moments that we see them really bonding and showing each other love, right? Like, we know all this bad stuff is happening, but what are those moments of joy and love and levity? And that's actually what I struggled with more than the hard parts. I can write sadness fairly easily, but writing joy tends to be a struggle for me.
No, and I think that you handled that, like, you balanced it really well and made their relationship very nuanced and layered, because even through the mom's fear of the water and having that association with, like, water is bad, like water destroys, like water, took someone from her life, her sibling, and but and then having Aniana have that love of the water and that very like polar opposite feeling and connection with it. But you see the mom, even though she has that fear, it's coming from a place of love and that she just wants her daughter to be safe. So I think that it was really well balanced. So it's like, yes, she is the antagonist in a way, but then it's not coming from like a malicious place. It's coming from a place of care. So I'm going to switch over now to Tamika with a question for you. So as Sicily, she loves writing. She loves, speaking up and getting, and making new friends. So what is one big way that Sicily finds her voice? And how does she show readers the importance of sharing personal stories?
I think the biggest way she finds her voice is just through that desire. When the kids question her about being a Black Panamanian, that desire to find the answer for herself is kind of the biggest way she finds her voice, because she goes down her path and starts researching. She starts talking to her family about things that she never knew, and she learns. And then in the midst of that, she writes down all the information that she's learning, because she kind of quotes a teacher that, oh, the best way to remember things is by writing it down. So she decides that's how she's going to go about learning her Black Panamanian history. And then in the end, that, I don't want to give it away, but that leads to how she ends up sharing her voice and gains that confidence to do so. In terms of, readers taking away from that, I think it all just boils down to confidence, which I feel like I've been saying that word a lot throughout this, but that's the major shift that you see in Sicily. In the beginning, she is very confident about her outside, but through the story, you see she becomes confident on the inside. And you see that shift that happens with her. And I think readers reading her story will see, wow, she did this. Look how she's changed. Look how she feels about sharing her story. And then, taking from that whatever motivation or inspiration to do that for themselves with anything else they might be struggling to share with other people.
Yeah, and you definitely see the progression from the beginning to end, how her confidence really grows and blooms. I need to work on not sharing spoilers. I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine.
Everyone should still read these books anyway. They're like really like fantastically like fast paced. Like you get so drawn into each of these stories because the voices are that strong. So it's a very immersive experience. And what I also really loved with how Sicily finds her voice is that it's also still connected to her family and her relationship with her grandfather as well, even though he's no longer with them. His past advice and relationship with her kind of encouraged her to start writing. So. Yeah,
and left a lasting impression on her too. Whereas like, oh, he chose me to receive something and, to keep going with it, and that also is another push for her to share her voice too, because she's, emulating what she saw with her grandfather.
Yeah, absolutely. So this next question I'm going to pose for Keka. This is going to be more about writing process. So, and the process of like the construction of these books. So since your title out of all three of these has illustrative moments throughout, I'm so curious what the process was like working with an illustrator, and did you get a chance to weigh in on what scenes were selected to be illustrated?
Actually, the illustrator, they keep us apart, basically. The publishing company, they like to keep us separated because they like illustrators to add the extra layer to the story. So I didn't communicate with the illustrator. They presented me the drafts and everything, and I loved it. It was amazing how well they picked the illustrator, because some of the scenes in Lola, they remind me of things that actually happened to me. And like when I was growing up, especially in one of the books, that the grandfather, when she goes to Guatemala and we see the grandfather, he looks like he has a special buckle that my grandfather used to wear. And I never talked about the buckle or anything.
Wow.
So it was like a magical moment for me to see that, how connected we were with like how the experiences that the illustrator had were similar to the ones I had, to create this universe where I have, for the first 4 books, I have Gloria Felix, and First Day of the Dead and the Tooth Fairy Mouse Mystery was illustrated by Carolina Vasquez. And they both did an amazing job on illustrating the stories. And actually, you can feel like you're in each scene. And so the process was, they selected the illustrator, then they sent me a draft. And if I saw anything that didn't work out, or little details like that, but it was minimal. And then it turned out to be an amazing book with the illustrations that are even better than what I could have ever imagined.
Yeah, I think some of these illustrators really are magical, because they can just tap into the essence of the story and pull out moments and showcase, even if you don't have illustrations throughout the book, even with the covers, they can really showcase like a strong package of what's inside. So that's so interesting to hear that you didn't have that communication. So, and yet they were still able to, psychically connect with you somehow.
It's just amazing how that connection is made. And
yeah,
and they could transfer my ideas into an actual illustration that it worked perfectly.
Yeah. So my next question is for Jasminne. I was going to ask you more about your writing process, but I'm going to ask you a 2-parter now, because I also want to know your feelings about your book cover design as well, and if you also felt like the illustrator was able to really capture the vibe of the book. But I also am curious to know your writing process and how you ended up landing on the choice to make this a novel in verse.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And I think the main answer is I'm a poet by trade. Like that was my first foray into literature at all. And so it was never not a question about, it was always going to be a novel in verse. I never had any intention of writing a prose novel. I still don't really. I tried. It's bad. So it's sitting in a drawer somewhere. And so it felt natural to me as a poet. Once I'd been reading a lot of novels in verse and really fell in love with the genre. Never anticipated actually writing a fiction novel of any kind before I, started really exploring the idea of a novel in verse. And so I knew that because her journey was so much of an internal one, and I really wanted readers to know what it feels like in her body, writing in verse and using poetry and sort of that lyrical language allowed me to explore that, I think, in more creative ways and more interesting ways, to really get super, intimate and close and personal with Aniana and what she was feeling physically and emotionally, and to really build that tension, not just with herself, right, those internal conflicts that she's facing, but with the people in her life around her. And so I just kind of always knew from the beginning that what I wanted to write was a novel in verse. And when this sort of story idea hit, and came to me after many months of watching Moana on end with my toddler at the time, I was like, oh, what if it's a modern day retelling of Moana, in the sense of like, it's a middle school, young girl who wants to be near the water, and there are these factors that prevent her from getting, near the water and in the water the way that she wants. And so verse just felt natural to me based off of, my previous writings and work. And because of it being such a close personal point of view, right, that we really want to be inside of Aniana's body when she's experiencing these things.
Yeah, and I think that was the perfect format for it. and it was very well executed. And for the cover, did you
Yeah, no, so I didn't. So this cover is by Dominican illustrator Gabby D'Alessandro, and she just took a few sample pages, like the first 100 pages of the book, and rendered this beautiful cover that I fell in love with immediately because there's so many little details. The orange tree that gets discussed a great deal in the book. There's an orange tree in front of Aniana's house. The marigold from her mother's garden that gets placed in her hair. And I didn't even notice this detail right at the get-go, but I describe a heart-shaped mole on Aniana's temple. And she drew the heart-shaped mole on her temple, which I didn't even see the first times that I looked at the book. And then suddenly I was like, oh my God, there's a heart-shaped mole. And then down here we have what some have assumed, and I agree, is a mother and a child dolphin to sort of represent the mother-daughter relationship there, or the parent-child relationship, because she also has a strong relationship with her father. And then she's holding her wrists, and it's a little hard to see with the glare, but she has, there are points on her joints that are sort of reddened and look a little bit inflamed on the cover here to indicate, right, that there's something going on. And so I think that just, her holding her wrist and seeing that redness is a nice foreshadowing, a nice indicator of oh, something's going on here. What, why are these points on her skin red, right? But she still has a hopeful smile, right? I didn't want sort of this sad sort of, so I love all the details. In the moon, there's a lot of talk about the full moon. So I think the illustrator, book cover artist, did a wonderful job just rendering so many of the small details related to the story on the cover. It's such a small space.
They really keyed into so many moments in the text, and I love when illustrators do that, and it's a fun surprise too, like you said, with the mole, or they'll pull something from the book that you're like, oh, I wrote that. Oh,
exactly.
Oh yeah, I did describe them to look like that.
Exactly.
So Tamika, I same question about how you felt about the cover, but also I want to know what your ultimate, because Sicily, she's a fashion gal. She does not love that she has to wear her not frumpy, but her school uniform is not up to her standards. So what is your ultimate fashion disaster outfit or fashion faux pas for you?
I'm not a fashion girl. I think for me, just overall, I want my clothes to fit how they should. I don't want to be tugging and doing all kind of stuff. So yes, at my age now, that's the least of it just needs to fit the way it should, and I'm good to go. But I do remember that is a little bit of me in Sicily. I didn't have to wear uniforms in school, but it was an important task the night before to get the look and the accessories right for the next day of school, and the nail polish and all that stuff taken care of the night before. And then with my cover, when my editor reached out about it, she told me to just let her know some things that really were important to me to have on the cover. So one thing that in the book is Sicily's favorite color is pink. So I wanted that to be accented there. And then at one point it was a lot of pink, and I was like, okay, we got to scale that back. So they ultimately decided to go with the orange for the font. One thing that I love here, and most people don't catch this at first, is the clouds here are shaped. This is the shape of Panama. I can't do this backwards, but in the middle there, that is the shape of Panama. And I'm not sure whose idea it was, but my editor was like, hey, I think we should do this. And I was like, yeah. So that's something I really love to share with people. Even Panamanian people are like, oh my God, I didn't even catch that. So because Panama has such a distinct shape, especially with it being so skinny and narrow for the canal. But overall, my focus was just making sure Sicily, I wanted her to look similar to Jasminne, having her look the way she's described in the book, right? So with pink, there she is with her journal, her hair is braided, she has all her accessories on, basically trying to play up the school uniform that she doesn't want to wear. She's got her purple bag there. So that was my main focus, was just make her look the way she's described in the book. So that was my focus. And then they decided, let's have her outside of school. Let's have her thinking and all that kind of stuff. So
I love that. It's so fun. Okay, so now I'm going to move over to the live questions from our audience here. So thank you everyone for tuning in. I will now be reading a few of your questions to our amazing panelists who have been so kind to be with us here today. Okay, so I'm going to start with Inez. She writes, did you always know you wanted to write books? So I will start with Keka for that one.
I actually, that was actually my dream. When I was little, I used to write in my grandfather's desk. He used to have a lot of stationery and things like that. So I would sit down and write little stories. I wish I kept them. But I always wanted to be an author. My career path took me different ways. But once my oldest daughter was born, I realized how important it was to tell my stories and to create that connection for the next generation. So that's why I started actually pursuing writing and becoming my dream a reality. So it's never too late to make your dreams come true.
I love that. It's so true. It is never too late, and it sometimes takes a while to get your work out there. So it's just, you gotta just keep trying and keep on writing, keep putting stuff out there. So Jasminne, did you always know you wanted to be a writer?
I have always written. From as long as I can remember, second, third grade, writing these little short stories. My dad would bring home, he's in the military, in the Army, and he'd bring home these big green sort of ledger books, like these hardback really, and just give them to me. He's like, oh, these are extras at work. And they just had lined paper, and I would fill them with stories. And it was always fun. And then, in middle school, I kept a journal. It was all teen angsty and hormonal. And, I hate my mom this and school sucks that and all of that, but I, and I wrote poetry in college, but it was always for me. And it wasn't until kind of in middle of college or so that I started going to open mics and slam poetry readings and slam competitions and sharing my work with others. And I really, truly felt that was the way that I was going to continue sharing my work, was just going to be on stage. Because I felt like nobody reads books anymore, and who's going to, and I just didn't ever really see that many people who looked like me with my experiences publishing books. And so I honestly, from the beginning, kind of stumbled onto publishing because I took a memoir writing class in college, and the professor decided to put together an anthology, liked one of my essays, and put the essay in the anthology. And so in that moment, for the first time, seeing my name in print, then I was hooked. I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. Like, this is what's going to last forever. I want more of this in my life, my name on pages of books. And so I started pursuing it, back in 2008, 2009, more seriously, and didn't get into children's literature actually until I had my daughter. And like Keka was like, okay, this is my jam. Like, I want to be sure that, little Jasminne didn't have the books she needed, but little Luz Maria, my daughter, is going to have all the books that she needs. And especially knowing that there are not as many books for young kids and young adults written by Dominicans and Dominican Americans and Dominican American, children of immigrants and things like that. And just knowing that story is one that needs to be seen and told more, and more, Afro Latinx children as well need to see themselves represented in books. And so I'm really passionate about that, and hopefully they'll keep publishing my books.
I love that. And I love that you had that aha moment of just when it just spoke to you, like, this is my path. Tamika, did you have a moment like that?
I think so. I remember in elementary school, we had this thing called the Young Writers Conference. So every year we had to write our little story, draw our pictures, and our teachers would send the book off, and we would get it professionally bound with our name on the spine. And I think that was like the moment where I was like, oh, this is so cool. But I didn't really pursue it until, so Sicily was 10 years in the making. 2013 is when I started writing. And even then it was just like, a hobby. I was going to writers' conferences, taking craft classes. And then it wasn't until like 2018, 19, where I said, I have a full draft. Let me see what I can do with this. And, querying agents, working with the publishers, really where I started to feel like, okay, this is real. I want to really do this. I think that's where it turned from that hobby to kind of a career. And it's interesting to like talking to my mom about this. She's like, I always saw you with the writing, but she's like, I didn't know how to nurture it. Like, I didn't know, I never see, like, I think Jasminne, you mentioned, like, we didn't see this growing up, other people being authors. So, but I think just realizing, oh, I can do this. And then picking my lane of, I don't really see too many other Black Panamanian authors talking about our culture, writing the book that I would have loved to have read as a child. So just, I can't say I was writing and reading forever. I did not enjoy writing as a child. I mean, reading as a child, because I never could relate to the stories that I had to read in school. But I think getting to this point has been really eye-opening for me, and understanding that need for it, right? Like my story, we always hear your story needs to be told, but really getting to understand your story does need to be told. There are kids who need this. So that's my roundabout way of, of answering your question, of saying, like, at some point I did finally get to this point of realizing this desire that's kind of been suppressed in me and following through with it.
Yeah, it's also very like mission driven, it sounds like, for a lot of you. So I think that's really wonderful that you're pulling from that experience from childhood and not having that representation and wanting to see that for kids today. So I'm going to also pull up this next question by D. Martinez about any challenges when, did you find that there were any challenges when writing middle grade, and what about joys? And I'll start. We'll start with you, Tamika, since you just went. And
I work at a school, K through 12 school, so I'm always in the kids' business. Like, what are you guys talking about? What's slang? What are you talking? What's going on? What's happening? So constantly drawing from what I see at work, my niece and my nephew, little cousins. So it wasn't hard at all. When I first started Sicily, I actually wanted it to be a picture book, and then realizing I have way too much to say. So the next jump was middle grade. And I think that, made the most perfect sense. So I didn't really have any struggles, tapping into that age group and finding that voice. Because like I said, I'm around it all day. And then I think over the joy of it was just seeing the completion of it and getting those responses. Like when I do school visits, hearing what the kids have to say about the character, and they might not relate to the whole race and culture aspect, but all the other drama Sicily goes through with her crush and fighting with friends, they can relate to that. And they're, oh, it's so real. I went through that and this happened to me too. So I think that the joy for me comes from, I got it. I got this age group. They're into it. I was able to tap into their world and, make this whole thing real, is what gives me joy with the story.
I love that. And Jasmine, same question.
Yeah, I think similarly, I taught middle school for a number of years, and I always feel like I'm 38, but I'm still like my 13-year-old self. Like, I don't know why I got stuck at 13, but my brain is still 13-year-old Jasmine. And so I constantly remember sort of that time period of my life. And I feel like getting into Aniana's headspace and world wasn't that difficult for me. Just thinking about, like, what did 13-year-old Jasmine need and want, and what were some of her, goals and aspirations, and what were those messy feelings that she went through. And so I think that similar to Tamika's character, in the sense that, like, even if you don't identify with Aniana's struggle with chronic illness and disability, et cetera, there are things about wanting to speak up and wanting to be understood by your parents and be independent, sort of that time period in your life where you're pulling away, but your parents are still like, want to be there, or, treat you kind of younger than what you are, perhaps, because again, they're losing their kid and their kid's growing up, and that's all sort of hard and difficult. But also just knowing that also at times, like, I feel like middle graders are the ones that do get ignored, because they're like, oh, they're the stinky hormonal ones. Let's leave them alone over there. We can't. And then suddenly parents, right, kind of come back at high school, like, oh, we got to get you ready to go to college. Like, suddenly we care again. And so I really love writing in the middle grade space, because I think that there are so many things and topics that you can explore while still doing things like concrete poems that are still kind of for the younger kids, right? They're still kids. They're still young. They're still growing into it. And I found that the kids really love the concrete poems and the shape poems in my book, especially like reluctant readers who are like, don't want to read, lots of text on a page, but they see that and they're like, oh, this is interesting. I can get into this. And so that was probably the fun part for me, is still trying to find ways to target that sort of younger self in them, while also discussing, more difficult topics like mental health and postpartum depression and trauma and disability and chronic illness, et cetera.
Yeah, and like you were saying, the middle school age range, there's a lot of changes going on, and it's a fun age group to be writing for, just because there's a lot of self-discovery, and you can really explore the characters. I'm gonna go to Keka for same question, and the time really escaped from me. I'm like, oh, we have all these questions from the audience. I feel so bad. We may not get to all of them. We're like at the last minute now. At 2:00, I was like, how will we fill all this time? And now I'm like, oh my God, I wish there was more time. So Keka, do you have your challenges or joys about writing for middle grade?
Actually, Lola is a little bit younger.
Yes.
But I have 3 kids, one in elementary, one in middle school, and one in high school. So I get to hear everything that happens in all the schools and everything. So, and I also was a teacher for a while. So I try to stay connected with what's going on around. And also, like Jasmine said, it's important to be connected with your younger self. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's so important when you're writing and when you're planning your speeches and everything. What would you like to see in the book or in the speech? Mm-hmm. Have in mind, who are we writing for?
Yes. And I know we are exactly at time, but I want to end with this one final question, because it's a good one. And it is from Joanne Villegas. What do you want for the future of Latinx books and readers? So I'll go over to Jasmine to start that one.
More representation, more representation, more representation. I want to see more Black faces like mine on the covers of Latinx books.
I love it. And Tamika?
Oh, ditto that. I agree 100%. Yeah.
And Keka?
Yeah, I agree with having all the colors and just having our stories told.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think that is a beautiful way to end this. So I just want to say thank you all so much for attending the Finding Your Voice panel with me, your moderator, Brigid Martin, author of Totally Psychic. Did not get to, I didn't need to talk about my book. You all can look that up, it's fine. This is about our fabulous panelists. They are amazing. They had so much wonderful things to say today about our middle school audience. And I think that all of these books have wonderful messages. I think all of our authors really showed us how much love was put into each of these books. So thank you for being here at the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. It was great having you all here today, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of your Friday afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.